The Eye of Minds, James Dashner. Chapter 1. The Coffin. Michael spoke against the wind to a girl named Tanya. I know it's water down there, but it might as well be concrete. You'll be flat as a pancake the second you hit. Not the most comforting choice of words when talking to someone who wanted to end her life, but it was certainly the truth. Tanya had just climbed over the railing of the Golden Gate Bridge, cars zooming by on the road, and was leaning back toward the open air, her twitchy hands holding on the pole wet with mist. Even if somehow Michael could talk her out of jumping, those slippery fingers might get the job done anyway. And then I'd be lights out. He pictured some poor sap of a fisherman thinking he'd finally caught the big one, only to reel in a nasty surprise. Stop joking, the trembling girl responded. It's not a game, not anymore. Michael was inside the Vertnet. The sleep to people who went in as often as he did. He was used to seeing scared people there, a lot of them. Yet, underneath the fear was usually the knowing deep down that no matter what was happening in the sleep, it wasn't real. Not with Tanya. Tanya was different. At least her aura, her computer simulated counterpart was. Her aura had the bad, crazy look of pure terror on her face, and it suddenly gave Michael chills, made him feel like he was hovering over that long drop to death. And Michael wasn't a big fan of death, fake or not. It is a game and you know it, he said louder than he'd wanted to. He didn't want it to startle her, but a cold wind had sprung up and it seemed to grab his words and whisk them down to the bay. Get back over here and let's talk. Well, both get out our experience points and we can go explore the city, get to know each other, find some crazes to spy on, maybe even hack some free food from the shops. It'd be good times, and when we're done, we'll find you a portal and you can lift back home. Take a break from the game for a while. This has nothing to do with blood. Tanya screamed at him. The wind pulled at her clothes, and her dark hair fanned out behind her like laundry on a line. Just go away and leave me alone. Just go away and leave me alone. I don't want your pretty boy face to be the last thing I see. Michael thought of Lifeblood Deep, the next level, the goal of goals, where everything was 1,000 times more real, more advanced, more intense. He was 3 years away from earning his way inside, maybe two, but right then he needed to talk to the dopey girl out of jumping to her date with the fishes, or had been sent back to the suburbs for a week, making Lifeblood Deep that much further away. Okay, look, he was trying to choose his words carefully, but I already made a pretty big mistake and knew it. Going out of a character and using the game itself as a reason for her to stop what she was doing meant had be docked points big time. And it was all about the points. But the girl was legitimately starting to scare him. It was that face, pale and sunken, as if she'd already died. Just go away, she yelled. You don't get it. I'm trapped here. Portals or no portals, I'm trapped. He won't let me lift. Michael wanted to scream right back at her. She was talking nonsense. A dark part of him wanted to say, forget it. Tell her she was a loser. Let her nosedive. She was being so stubborn. It wasn't like any of it was really happening. It's just a game. He had to remind himself of that all the time. But he couldn't mess this up. He needed the points. All right, listen. He took a step back, held his hand up like he was trying to calm and scare an animal. We just met. Give it some time. I promise I won't do anything nutty. You'll want to jump? I'll let you jump. But at least talk to me. Tell me why. Tears lined her cheeks, and her eyes had gone red and puffy. Just go away, please. Her voice had taken on the softness of defeat. I'm not messing around here. I'm done with this. All of this. Done? Okay, that's fine to be done. But you don't have to screw it up for me, too, right? Michael figured maybe it was okay to talk about the game after all, since he was using it as her reason to end it. To check out of the virtual flesh and bones hotel and never come back. Seriously, walk back to the portal with me. Lift yourself. Do it the right way. You are done with the game. You're safe. I get my points. Ain't the happiest ending you ever heard of? I hate you, she spat. Literally, I spray of misty saliva. I don't even know you and I hate you. This has nothing to do with lifeblood. Then tell me, what it does have to do with it? He said it kindly, trying to keep his composure. You've got all day to jump. Just give me a few minutes. Talk to me, Tanya. She buried her head in the crook of her right arm. I just can't do it anymore. She whimpered and her shoulders shook, making Michael worry about her grip. I can't. Some people are just weak, he thought, though he wasn't stupid enough to say it. Lifeblood was by far the most popular game in the Vertnet. War or fight dragons with a magic sword, fly spaceships, explore the freaky love shacks. But that stuff got old quick. In the end, nothing was more fascinating than the bare bones. Dirty in your face, greedy, get me out of here, real life. Nothing, nothing. And there were some like Tanya who obviously couldn't handle it. Michael sure could. He'd risen up its ranks almost as quickly as legendary gamer Gunner skill. Come on, Tanya, he said. How can it hurt to talk to me? And if you are going to quit, why would you want to end your last game by killing yourself so violently? Her head snapped up and she looked at me with eyes so hard she shivered again. She shivered again. Canes haunted me for the last time, she said. He can't just trap me here and use me for an experiment. Sick the kill seems on me. I'm gonna rip my core out. Those last words changed everything. Michael watched in horror as Tanya tightened her grip on the pole with one hand, then reached up with the other and they started digging into her own flesh. Michael forgot the game, forgot the points. The situation had gone from annoying to actual life and death. In all his years of playing, he'd never seen someone code out their core, destroying the barrier device within the coffin that kept the virtual world and the real world separate in their mind. Stop that, he yelled, one foot already on the railing. Stop! He jumped down onto the catwalk on the outer edge of the bridge and froze. He was just a few feet from her now, and he wanted to avoid any quick movements that might cause her panic. Holding his hands out, he took a small step towards her. Don't do that, Michael said as softly as he could in the beating wind. Tanya kept digging into her right temple. She'd peeled back a piece of her skin, and the stream of blood from the wound quickly covered her hands and the side of her face in red gore. A look of terrifying calmness had come over her, and if she had no concept of what she was doing to herself, though Michael knew well enough that she was busy hacking the code. Stop coding for 1 second, Michael shouted. Would you just talk about this before you rip your freaking core out? You know that you know what that means. Why do you care so much? She responded, so quietly that Michael had to read her lips to understand, but at least she'd stopped digging. Michael just stared because she had stopped digging and was now reaching inside the torn mass of flesh with her thumb and forefinger. You just want your experience points, she said. Slowly, she pulled out a small metallic chip slick with blood. I will forfeit my points, Michael said, trying to hide his fear and disgust. I swear you can't mess around anymore, Tanya. Code that thing back in and come talk to me. It's not too late. She held up the visual manifestation of the core, gazed as it is with fascination. Don't you see the irony in all of this? She asked. If it weren't, if you weren't for my coding skills, I probably wouldn't even know who Kane was. About his kill seams, and he is plans for me, and his plans for me. I'm good at it, and because of that monster, I just programmed the core right out of my own head. Not your real head. It's just a simulation, Tanya. It's not too late. Michael couldn't remember a time in his entire life when he'd felt that ill. She looked at him so sharply that he took a step backward. I can't take it anymore. I can't take him anymore. He can't use me if I'm dead. I'm done. She curled the core onto her thumb, then flicked it toward Michael. It flew over his shoulder. She saw flashes of sunlight glint off it as it spun through the air, almost like it was winking at him, saying, Hey, buddy, you suck at suicide negotiations. It blended with the plink, somewhere out in the traffic where it would be crushed in seconds. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Someone so sophisticated in manipulating code that she could destroy her core, the device that essentially protected players' brains while they were in the sleep. Without you, your core, your brain wouldn't be able to filter the stimulation of the VirtNet properly. If your core died in the sleep, you would die in the wake. He didn't know anyone who'd seen this before. 2 hours earlier, he'd been eating stolen blue chips at the man deli with his best friends. All he wanted now was to be back there eating turkey on the rye, enduring Brisson's jokes about old ladies, underwear, and listening to Sarah tell him how awful his latest sleep haircut was. If Kane comes for you, Tanya said, tell him that I won in the end. Tell him how brave I was. He can trap people here and steal all the bodies he wants, but not mine. Michael was done talking. He couldn't take one more word out of this girl's blood-smeared mouth. As quickly as anything he'd ever done in his life, as any character in any game, he jumped toward the pole she clung to. She screamed, momentarily frozen by his sudden action, but then she let go, actually pushed herself away from the bridge. Michael grabbed for the railing to his left to his left with one hand and reached for her one for her with the other, but missed both. Hit something solid, then slipped, arms flailing. He felt nothing but air, and he felt almost in sync with her. An incredible shriek escaped his mouth, something he would have been embarrassed about if he only companion if his only companion was about to lose her life. With her core coded out, her death would be real. Michael and Tanya fell towards the harsh gray waters of the bay. Wind tore at their clothes, and Michael's heart felt like it was creeping along the side of his chest, up his throat. He screamed again. On the level, he knew he wouldn't hit the water, feel the pain. Then he'd be lifted and wake up back home, safe and sound in his coffin. But the Vertnet's power was fake reality, and right now the reality was terror. Somehow Michael and Tanya Auros found each other on the long fall, chest to chest, like tandem skydivers. As the churning surface below rushed towards them, then wrapped their arms around each other, pulling closer together. Michael wanted to scream again, but clamped his jaw shut when she saw the complete calmness of on her face. Her eyes bored into Michael's, searched him and found him, and he broke somewhere on inside. They hit the water as hard as he thought they would, hard as concrete, hard as death. The moment of pain was short but intense, everywhere all at once, bursting and exploding through Michael's every nerve. He didn't even have time to make a sound before it ended. Neither did Tanya, because he heard nothing but the distinct and horrific crash of hitting the water surface, and then it all dissipated and his mind went blank. Michael was alive, back in the nerve box, what most people call the coffin, lifted from the sleep. The same couldn't be said for the girl. A wave of sadness, then disbelief hit him with his own eyes. He'd seen her change her code, rip the core from the virtual flesh, then toss it away like nothing more than crumb. When it ended for her, it ended for real, and being a part of it made Michael's insides feel twisted up. Wed, he never witnessed anything like that. He blinked a few times, waiting for the unliking process to be complete. Never before he had been so relieved to be done with his VertNet, done with the game, ready to get out of his box and breathe in the polluted air of the real world. A blue light came on, revealing the door of the coffin just a few inches from his face. The liquid gels and air paths had already receded, leaving the only part Michael truly hated, no matter how many times he did, which was way more than he could count. 10 icy strands of nerve wire pulled out of his neck and back and arms, slithering like snakes along the skin until they disappeared into their little hidey holes, where they'd be disinfected and stored for his next game. His parents were amazed that he voluntarily let those things burrow into his body so often, and he couldn't blame them. There was something downright creepy about it. A loud click was followed by a mechanical clank, and then a whooshing gust of air. The door of the coffin began to rise, swinging up and away on his hinges like Dracula's very own resting place. Michael almost laughed at the thought. Being a vicious, blood sucking vampire loved by the ladies was only one of a million things a person could do inside they sleep, only one of a billion. He stood up carefully. He always felt a little woozy after being lifted, especially when he'd been gone for a few hours, naked and covered in sweat. Clothing ruined the sensory stimulation of the nerve box. Michael stepped over his lip of the box, thankful for the soft carpet under his toes. It made him feel grounded back in reality. He grabbed the pair of boxes he'd left on the floor, but put them on. He figured a decent person probably would have opted for some pants and a t shirt as well, but he wasn't feeling so decent at the moment. All he'd been asked to do by the Lifeblood game was talk a girl out of suicide for experience points, and not only had he failed, he'd helped drive her to do it for real. For real. For real. Tanya, wherever her body might be, was dead. She would rip out her core before dying, a feat of programming protected by passwords that she only could have done to herself. Faking a core removal wasn't possible in the VertNet. It was too dangerous. Otherwise, you would never know if someone was faking, and people would do it left and right for the kicks or to get reactions. No, she didn't change her code, removed the safety barrier in her mind that separated the virtual and the real, and fried the actual implant back home, and she's done it with purpose. Tanya, the pretty girl with the sad eyes and the delusions that she was being haunted, dead. Michael knew I'd be in the news Bob soon. They report that he had been with her and the VNS Vertnet security would probably come and talk to him about it. They definitely would. Dead. She was dead, as lifeless as the sagging mattress on his bed. It all hit him then, hit him like a fastball to the face. Michael barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up everything in his stomach. And then he collapsed to the floor and pulled himself into a ball. No tears came. He wasn't the crying sort, but he stayed there for a long time. Chapter 2. The Proposition. Michael knew that most people, when they felt as if the earth itself decided just didn't like them anymore, when they felt like they were at the bathroom of a dark pit, went to their mom or dad, maybe a brother, maybe a sister. Those with none of the above might find themselves knocking at the door of an aunt, a grandpa, a third cousin twice removed. But not Michael. He went to Brizan and Sarah, the two best friends a person could ever ask for. They knew him like no one else, and they didn't care what he said or did or wrote or ate, and he returned the favor whenever they needed him. But there was something very strange about their friendship. Michael had never met them. Not literally anyway. Not yet. They weren't Vietnet they were Vietnet friends, though and true and though and he'd gotten to know them first in the beginning levels of lifeblood, and they were growing closer and closer the higher up there they went. The three of them had joined forces almost from the day they met to move up in the game of all games. They were the terrible trio, the trifecta to the sectia, the burned in pillage e trilogy. Their names didn't make them many friends. They'd been branded cocky by some, idiots by others, but they had fun, so they didn't care. The bathroom floor was hard, and Michael couldn't lie there forever, so he pulled himself together and headed straight for his favorite place on earth to sit, the chair. It wasn't just a normal piece of furniture, but it was the most comfortable thing he'd ever sat on, like sinking into a man made cloud. He had some thinking to do, and he needed to arrange a meeting with his best friend. He plopped down and looked out the window at the sad gray exterior of the apartment complex across the street. He looked it like a dreary rainstorm frozen solid. Then, only thing marring the blackness was a huge sign advertising Lifeblood Deep. The only thing mirroring the bleakness was a huge sign advertising Lifeblood Deep. Blood red letters on a black plate, nothing else. And if the game designers were fully aware that the words alone were all they needed, everyone knew them, and everyone wanted in on the action, wanted to earn the right to go there someday. Michael was like every other player, just one of the herd. Herd. They thought of Gunnar Scale, the greatest player in Lifeblood the Vietnet had ever known. Blood, but the man had disappeared off the grid. Recently, rumor had it been off. I don't even think I could do it. Now, several in a week. And what about the gamer, Kane? Brazen asked. I've heard he's big time, but how could someone possibly trap others inside the sleep? It has to be all talk. The tables around them had just grown quiet, and the name seemed to echo through the room. People stared at Breezen, and Michael understood why. Kane was becoming infamous, and the name made people pale. Over the over the last few months, he'd been infiltrated, infiltrating everything from games to private meeting rooms, terrorizing his victims with visions and physically attacked them. Michael hadn't heard that part about trapping people until Tanya, but the very name Kane haunted the virtual world. As if he lingered just out of sight to matter where you went. Prison was all fake bravado. Michael shrugged off the other customers in the cafe and focused on his friends. She kept saying it was Kane's fault, that she was trapped by him and couldn't take him anymore. Sometime about stealing bodies and think Carl kill Sims. I'm telling you, even before she started on the core, I could see in her eyes that she was dead serious. She definitely run across him somewhere. We don't even know how much about the guy behind Kane yet, Sarah offered. I've heard every story on him, and that he's all there are stories. No one has any scoop on the gamer himself. No pics, no audio or video, nothing. It's like he's not real. It's the Vertnet Breezen counter. Things don't have to be real to be real. That's the whole point. No, Sarah shook her head. He's a gamer, a person lying in in a coffin with all the publicity. We should know about more about him. The media should be all over this guy. The VNS should be able to track him at least. Michael felt like they weren't getting nowhere. They were getting nowhere. Hey, back to me, guys. I'm supposed to be traumatized, and you are supposed to be making me feel better. So far, you suck at it. I look of genuine concern crossed Breezen's face. No doubt, dude. Sorry, but glad it wasn't you. I'm glad it was you, not me. I know that whole suicide negotiation thing, it's part of the lifeblood experience stuff, but who could have known yours would be a real one? I probably wouldn't sleep for a week after seeing something like that. Still sucking, Michael replied with a how with a half-hearted laugh. In truth, he was better now just being with his friends, but something inside him felt like he was trying to way out, gnaw his way out. Something dark with big teeth that didn't want him to ignore it. Sarah leaned over and squeezed his arm. Neither of us had a clue of what must have been like, she said softly. And we'd be idiots to pretend, but I'm sorry it happened. Michael just blushed and looked at the floor. Thankfully, Breezen brought them back to reality. I gotta use the bathroom, he announced. Standing up, a person even did stuff like the inside the sleep, while your real body took care of business back in the coffin. Everything was meant to feel real. Everything. Charming, Sarah said, though a sign as the released Michael arm sat sat back in her chair, simply charming. They talked for another hour or so, ending with the usual promise to meet in the real world soon. Breezen told them if they didn't do it by the end of the month, he would start cutting off a finger every day until it happened. Michael's not his own. That got a much needed laugh. The three of them said their goodbyes at a portal, and Michael lifted back to the wake, going through the usual routine inside the coffin until he could get out. And he walked over the chair. His gaze naturally landed on the big and for the lifeblood deep outside his window, followed by the usual few seconds of covering and figurative drooling. He almost sat down but changed his mind, knowing he'd never get up, exhausted and sore head to toe. And he hated falling asleep in the chair. He always woke up with creaks in places humans weren't meant to have creaks. He signed and trying not to think of the girl named Tanya who'd killed herself right before his eyes somehow made it over to his bed. Then he collapsed into a long night of dreamless sleep. Getting himself out of bed the next morning was like breaking out of a cocoon. It took 20 minutes for the smart side of his brain to convince the stupid side that talking a sick day at school wasn't a good idea. He'd already been out 7 times this semester, one or two more, and they'd start cracking down. He'd only gotten more sore in the night from his plummet into the bay with Tanya, and the strange feeling still turning his stomach. Somehow, though, Michael made it to the breakfast table where his nanny, Elga, had just placed a plate of eggs and bacon. A nanny, his amazing Vertnet set up a nice apartment. He had a lot to thank his wealthy parents for. They traveled a lot, and at the moment he could remember when they left on when they left when they had left or when they were getting back. But they made it up to him with the many things they give him they gave him between school, the Vertnet, and Elga. He hardly had time to miss them. Good morning, Michael, Elga said with her slight but still noticeable German accent. I trust you sleep well, yes? He grunted and she smiled. That's why he loved Elga. She didn't get all huffy or offended when all you wanted to do was grunt like an animal waking from hibernation. It was no skin off her back, and her food was delicious, almost as good as the Vertnet. Michael finished every morsel of breakfast, then headed out the door to catch the train. The streets were bustling, sweets and skirts and coffee cups as far as the eye could see. There were so many people that Michael could almost swear they were doubling, like reproducing cells right before his eyes. Everyone had the usual blank, bored look that Michael knew well. Like him, he'd suffer and slog through their dreary job or school until they get back home and enter the Vertnet once again. Michael entered the flow, dodging commuters left and right, and made his way down the avenue. Then turned right at his usual shortcut, a one-way alley full of trash cans and piles of garbage. He couldn't understand why the discarded trash never seemed to actually make it into the big metal containers. But on the morning like this, sharing the street with empty chip bags and discarded banana peels beat the heck out of the marching masses. He was halfway to the other side of the alley when the screech of tires stopping him in his tracks. The surge of the engine reverberated off reverberated up the street from behind, and Michael spun around. The instant he saw that oncoming car, it painted gray and dull like a dying storm, he knew. He knew that this car had something to do with him and that it wasn't going to have a happy ending. He turned and ran, recognizing on some level that whoever was after him had planned to trap him in that alley. The end seemed miles away now. He'd never make it. The sound of the car grew louder and as it gained on him, and despite all the strange and crazy things he'd experienced in his sleep, terror exploded in Michael's chest. Real terror. And he thought, what a way to end. Squashed like a bug in the trash riddled alley. He didn't dare glance behind him, but he could feel that approach of vehicle. He was close, and he had no chance to outrunning it. He gave up on trying to flee and dove behind the next garbage pile. The car screeched to a halt as he rolled and jumped back to his feet, ready to sprint in the other direction. The rear door of the sedan popped open, and out stepped a sharply dressed man with a black sky mask pulled over his head, eyes fixed on Michael's true slits in the fabric. Michael froze, just for an instant, but it was long enough. The man tackled him, slamming his body to the ground. Michael opened his mouth to scream, but a cold hand clamped over his face, silencing him. Panic cut through his body like a hot sword, and adrenaline flooded his system as he twisted and shoved his attacker. But the man was too strong and flipped Michael over onto his stomach, pinning his arms behind him. Stop fighting, the stranger said. No one gonna hurt you. But we don't have time to mess around. I need you get in the car. Michael's face was pressed against the cement. Oh, really? I'll be perfectly safe. I was just thinking that. Shut your smart aleck mouth, kid. We just can't let anybody know who we are. Now, get in the car. The man got to his feet, dragging Michael up with him. Your butt, the stranger said, pausing for effect in the car. Michael made one last pathetic attempt to break free, but it was useless. The man's grip was iron strong. Michael had no choice but to do what he was told. The fight drained out of him, and he let the man guide him to the back seat of the car, where he squeezed in next to another masked man. The door slammed shut and the car lurched forward, the screech of the tires echoing up the walls of the concrete canyon. As the car tore out of the alley and onto the main road, Michael's mind spun. Who were these people, and where were they taking him? Where were they taking him? Another wave of panic washed over him, and he acted. He slammed his elbow into the crotch of the guy to his left, then lunged for the door as the man doubled over in agony, cursing things that would have made even Breezen blush. Michael's fingers had just curled around the door handle when the original thug yanked him backwards backward, his arm encircling Michael's neck. The man squeezed until Michael was gasping for air. Stop it, boy, he said far too calmly, for the reason those were in the last words Michael wanted to hear. Anger surged in his chest, and he struggled to break free from the grip. Stop it, the stranger screamed this time. Stop acting like a child and calm yourself. We are not going to hurt you. You're actually hurting me right now. Michael coughed out. The man loose the man loosened his grip. Behave. The man loosened his grip. Behave. And that's the worst of it. Do we have a deal, kid? Fine, Michael grounded. Because what else could he do? As for time to think about it, the man seemed to relax at that. Good. Now sit back and shut up, he directed. Wait, no. First apologize to my friend. That was totally uncalled for. Michael looked it over at the guy to his left and shrugged. Sorry. Hope you can still have babies. The man didn't respond, but he glared through the sky masks was fierce. Humbled by the man's anger, Michael looked away. The adrenaline had faded, his strength was exhausted, and he was being driven through the city by four men in black masks. Things didn't look so bright. The rest of the ride went by in complete silence. Michael's heart, however, continued to thump away like a heavy metal drumbeat. He thought he'd known fear before. He'd been thrown into countless horrific situations in the Vertnet that had felt perfectly real. But this was real, and the fear was beyond anything he had experienced. He wondered if he could drop dead of cardiac arrest at the ripe old age of 16. As if in mockery, every glance outside seems to land on those red on black lifeblood deep posters. Even though the tiny optimistic side of his brain kept trying to tell him that somehow he'd get out of this alive, he knew that being kidnapped by masked men usually didn't end well. The signs only reminded him that his dream of reaching the deep probably wouldn't happen after all. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the city and turned into the huge parking of the stadium where the Falcons played. It was completely empty, and the driver pulled to the very front now, where he stopped and set the emergency brake, the massive structure looming above them. A sign in the front of the parking space read reserve. Violations will be tolled. A beep sounded somewhere in somewhere in the car, followed by a crack from outside, then the whir of machinery. Immediately afterward, the vehicle started to sink into the ground, and Michael's heart leaped, and they descended. The brightness of the day quickly melted into the fluorescent interior lighting. Finally, the car came to rest with a soft bump, and Michael looked around to see that they were in a huge underground garage with at least a dozen cars parked along one wall. The driver released the emergency brake and pulled into the empty spot. They cut, then cut the engine. "We're here," the driver announced. Rather needlessly, Michael thought. They offered Michael two options. They could drag him by the feet face down for a close up view of the cement, or he could walk with them under his own power without trying anything. He chose the second option. As they marched next to him, his heart kept trying to break through his rib cage with its relentless pounding. The four men escorted him through a door, down in a half hallway, then through another door into a large conference room. At least he assumed that was what it was, but based on the long cherry wood table, plush leathers chairs, and lit bar in the corner. He was surprised to see only one person waiting for them, a woman. She was tall, with long black hair and wide set, exotic looking eyes. Somehow she was gorgeous and terrifying at the same time. "Leave him with me," she said, four words softly spoken, but the men practically dove out the door, closing it behind them. And if they feared her beyond anything else, those streaking eyes focused on Michael's face. "My name is Diane Weber, but you're referred to me as an agent Weber. Please have a seat." She gestured towards the chair closest to Michael, and it took every one's of, of his willpower to hesitate before he sat. He forced himself to count to five, staring at her, trying not to look away. Then he did as she asked. She came over and sat next to him, then crossed her leg then crossed her long, pretty legs. "Sorry for the rough housing to get you here. What we're about to discuss is extremely urgent and confidential, and I didn't want to waste any time asking. I'm missing school. Asking would have worked just fine. Somehow she'd put him at ease, which made him angry. It was clear that she was manipulative, that she used her beauty to melt men's hearts. "What could you possibly want me for, anyway?" "But I need to hear you say," she said. "I need to hear your commitment. We need your skills in the Vertnet." That little boost of pride brought Michael back to himself a bit. "I want to know what it is." "That's more like it." She leaned back, and the tension in the room seemed to lift. "The morality doctrine. At the moment, we know very little. It's something hidden in the Vertnet, somewhere off the knowing grid. A file of our program of some sort that could seriously damage not just the Vertnet but real world as well." Sounding promising. "Sounds promising," Michael muttered immediately, he reading it. Luckily, she let it pass. The truth was that he'd perked up the notion of a secret part of the Vertnet. He wanted to know where it was. The doctrine could devastate humanity and the world as we know it. "Tell me, Michael, have you heard of the gamer who calls himself Kane?" The name made Michael's heart lurched. The girl Tanya, her face come back to him, and as well as her words, how Kane was tormenting her. Michael gripped the sides of his chair because it suddenly felt like he was falling off the bridge all over again. How did all these things relate? "I know of Kane," he said. I saw a girl kill herself. She mentioned him. Yes, we know, Agent Weber acknowledged. That's a small part of the reason you're here. You are a witness to know how bad things are getting. We've been able to tie Kane to this mortality doctrine, and it's all linked to cases like what you saw happen. People trapped in the VertNet and driven to decoding their own cores. It's the worst cyber terrorism I've ever came across. Why I'm why am I here? Michael asked in a dry croak, feeling an embarrassment lack of confidence. How can I help? She was silent for a bit. We found people comatose inside their coffins. CAT scans reveal brain damage, and if they were the victims of some sick experiment, they are complete vegetables. She paused again. We have evidence that Kane's involved, and somehow it's all related to this mortality doctrine program hidden somewhere inside the VertNet. We need to find both the man and the mortality doctrine. Will you help us? She asked it so simply, and if she was asking him to make a quick trip for the store for some milks and bread, Michael wanted to run, actually. He wanted a lot of things, just then time travel would have been great, he thought, but more realistically, he wanted his room and his bed, his coffin escape to some brainless sports game, beginner level, then the man deli blue chips hanging out with Brizen and Sarah, a movie, a book, his mom and dad back from traveling, and to never hear about this again. But one word popped out of his mouth, and he didn't know that he meant it until he heard himself say it. Yes.